Welcome to Cattle Call, an original production of the Nebraska Rural Radio Association, brought to you in part by Wolf Auto, small town strong. My guest on today's program, once again, is Brad Kooima from Kooima and Varlick there at Sioux Center, Iowa, as we talk about some of the things that are going on in the trade here this week. Well, first of all, just a quick review of where we ended last week. How do you think the cash trade finally came out? And, the fact that looks like they did get some cattle bought for deferred delivery. Has that had an impact this week?
They did. You're right. And that's good of you to notice the 15 to 30 day category for sure. Chad, thanks for having me on. We finished up the week in the north, basically at 245, which a pretty solid trade, right? A very strong cash market and a market that's still very much a premium to the front end or any of the months for that matter on the futures market. The South was a little weird in that it was hard for us to even really quote the market. There was such a little bit of trade there in the South. There was a handful of 237 early that went to a regional and went exported to the north. And then by the end of the week, I think that there was probably a standoff mostly between the feed yard and the packer. There was a little bit of trade at 235, and that's kind of the way they've been, hanging there $8 to $10 lower than the north. But still, a relatively strong cash market, not just the live cattle, but the feeder cattle cash market is just on fire. Like Oak City today is quoting their market 15, 18 higher or something like that. And that's got something to do with the market too. And the feeder cattle trade, that's strong for sure.
Yeah. Can I ask you about a quirk that I've noticed in the market here recently? It seems like we are buying more cattle in the north. It's getting quoted at live money. And you see that from time to time, but is there something seasonally that happens this time of year where that happens? Or is there a market dynamic maybe where that is showing up a little bit more right now, Brad?
It's a good question and a question that I could go a couple of different ways with. There is a tendency seasonally to see more live bids this time of year in the north, especially, and that's somewhat driven by the people that buy our cattle. So the kind of cattle that we're selling here in the north are now what I would describe as being long-fed calves that went on feed last fall, October, November, been fed a long time. So they've got a lot of yield in them. Okay. So now you got a packer that's very willing to buy them live because he can trust that the yield is going to be really good. In fact, maybe it's to the packer's advantage, even knowing that the cattle are going to grade really or yield really well. There is something too, though, about the negotiation part of that process, which is nobody's going to ever make me believe that if you have less negotiation, you have better prices. The more you negotiate, the better the prices are, as you can witness right now between the disparity of the north and the south. You've got the biggest supply imbalance, regional supply imbalance, probably in my lifetime, okay, because of the border being closed. So Texas has got 10 months in a row of record low placements. They've got a lot less cattle. They got 80% cattle in feed, and yet they get $10 less than us. And I would suggest it's because they got so many formulas that drive that market that's all they can get. So anyway, my shout out to the people in the north here who are willing to take on price discovery.
Yeah. All right. What did you make of the Agriculture Secretary's announcement in Texas? We were waiting for that at the end of the day on Friday. Turned out to be an influx of money into prevention, breeding of the sterile insects, right? How do you think the market chewed on that and digested it?
That's a situation where, in general, Chad, that leaking, that's not the right word. When you release news like that, it preys on these algorithm systems. It creates uncertainty. It creates volatility. And so it was the perfect storm where the day before the report, people thought, oh man, I guess if they're going to have this special press announcement, they're going to say something, right? They're probably going to make some announcement about when the border's going to get open. So we sold off sharply going into the Thursday's close, and then Friday we were trading uncertain and waited for this long-winded political message first before they got to any substance about the thing, and then only to say that really the only thing that they were going to do about the border was spend $750 million to build a sterile fly facility. So And then the market caught because they thought, well, they're not going to close the border. And they waited a little through the Q&A part of the deal to see if somebody was going to ask a question, okay, well, when, and nothing developed out of that. So as the press conference ended, I think that now all of a sudden you had this whole rush of buying, whether it's algo inspired or whether it's, you and me inspired or whatever it is. And we haven't looked back. Some of the feeder cattle months are almost $20 higher than they were during the press conference. $20. It's Wednesday today, and that was just Friday. So it's a little curious to me that they got that much out of it, but that's the trend of the market is higher. It can get wild as you guys have all seen here, huh?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to a listener and viewer question. Like you say, if you have a question for Brad, put that in the comments, and we're going to try and address some of them. The one that I want to talk to about today is this idea of whether there's value in buying cattle to put in the feedlot right now. One listener said, "I can't decide if it's a good idea to fill those lots right now." Is that something? Is that even a question right now? Should you have that as a question?
It's a great question. It's a question I ask myself as someone who's fed cattle for 50 years, let alone someone that's, a small operation that's trying to decide. A couple of things I would say about this. One is when I was a long time ago, I thought I got some pretty good advice. And that was, asking not exactly that question, but an overall management type of a decision. And that was encouraged me to, well, if this is your program, if you usually feed calves, or if you usually buy a third of your cattle earlier in the summer and then a little later on the fall, if you have a program, a plan, it's probably a good idea to stick with that plan. Because then those decisions average out. There's going to be years where you wish you would have maybe done a little more, wish you would have done a little less, but over time, those decisions have a tendency to average out. So, my first advice usually to people when I say, well, what do you usually do? And then I'll say, well, why wouldn't you at least do what you usually do? So there's that. Now, do I recognize that there's risk with the feeder cattle up here? I would say there's more risk right now than there ever has been. Feeding cattle, particularly when they're this high. And the risk is probably not associated with the fact that there's suddenly going to be a lot more cattle next month, because there isn't. Okay. You haven't rebuilt the herd. You've had a tiny bit of heifer retention to start. And I think it's tiny, a little. Okay. Not the drama that we had in 15 and 16, where it's like they flipped the switch and everybody saved a heifer at the same time. So I think you still have to worry about, if you're going to be doing this, please, you got to be able to stand a couple $100 a head risk, it looks to me like, because even if you're going to get it, and I would encourage you to do something like that with a put option or something, because of the volatility, those options cost a lot, right? So you're not going to be able to cover break even. So decide if you're willing to take maybe a couple $100 a head risk is what it's going to be. But I would, encourage, especially somebody that, hey, this is a little new, this is a little more out of my comfort zone of what I'm usually doing. Make sure you do something to mitigate some of that risk. Those are tough questions. Extreme risk up here with a feeder cattle this high.
All right. Well, thanks for the response on that. And if you have a question, put that in the comments below. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button, and that will let you know when we have another cattle call come out. You mentioned a moment ago placements. We do have a cattle on feed report here at the end of the week. Anything you think there will be any fireworks in this one? What are you going to be looking for?
There has a tendency to be fireworks on every one of them. You know what, Chad? The number that seems to be driving the bus on these reports lately is placements. I'm old enough to remember when I thought marketings was the most important number. That you got to market your way to a hole, you got to market your way to a tighter supply. Well, and now anymore, because of what's going on with the border, I think the placements have taken kind of the front end of this deal. So the guesses are on feed at 98.1, placements at 91.1. and marketing's at 94.1. So placements at 9, or let's go briefly. Placement or on feed at 98. Last week's slaughter was more like 11 or 12% below a year ago.
Oh, wow.
Year-to-date slaughter is closer to 7% on fed cattle below a year ago. So something's off here. Either we're backing cattle up or the numbers are wrong from the USDA.
And you've said before, you felt that the things are pretty current right now. So that'll be an interesting where those numbers come together, huh?
100%. It's a dynamic that unfortunately you only get to see when it's way back there in the rearview mirror, and you go like, oh yeah, right, now we know. The North is very current, no question in my mind. The South's got a lot of weight problems, but they also don't have any cattle. But your question is placements.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm looking at expectations for the state of Texas, and that's a big state, feed a lot of cattle, probably the low 70s again. Let's say 75% maybe is a guess I've been hearing for their placements for their state. So for us to have a placement number nationally at 91 seems very, very reasonable, right? By the way, that if that is the case, Texas, that would be the 10th consecutive month of record low placements. It's a big deal. I mean, this border being closed, there's plenty of cattle that would have already been dead that haven't made it over the border. And they are getting slaughtered and they're getting fed in Mexico. But they're not coming into the United States, not at this point.
All right. And I guess as we wrap up today's program, what are your thoughts on the cash cattle market this week? It's been very, very, very quiet so far this week. And I kind of find that surprising, like you said, how little we moved in the South last week, not even an inkling so far. What are you hearing? What are kind of your feelings about the cash trade for this week?
And there hasn't been a lot of trade yet either. There's been just a little bit of some meat bid stuff in Nebraska, 392. There's been 245 bid up here where we are, and that basically is steady, and that's getting passed. Most asking prices up here in the north are 250 to 251. Asking prices in the south at 240, which would probably fit if they're going to stay $10 behind us. Hasn't been that trade yet. If I had a guess at in there, that's what you're asking me to do, and I'm only guessing. I would say cash will probably settle in someplace 47 or 48 in the north, and maybe 38 or 9 in the south, maybe 40. But a day like today surely doesn't hurt, when you put that much confidence in the feedlot with the sharply higher close again on the futures today.
All right. Brad, it's always good to talk to you. Again, just look forward to having conversations with some of the cattlemen out there, right? Just reach out, right?
Yeah, give us a call if you want to talk. We got 3 other guys here that can talk to you too. 712-722-0023. There's the number. Thanks for having me on. I always enjoy it, Chad. You do a nice job.
It's always been a great time to have you on. I appreciate the insight and the expertise. Again, that's Brad Kooima and Varlick at Sioux Center, Iowa. Thanks for joining us for today's Cattle Call program. Again, Cattle Call, an original production of the Nebraska Rural Radio Association, brought to you by Wolf Auto, small town strong. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week on Cattle Call.